The cotton for official opening.
Good morning. How's everyone doing this morning? Good. I want to officially open up our time today on behalf of Bishop Guns and co-pastor and the entire St. Paul family. For those of you who are visiting with us, we want to say thank you so much for coming. I do want us at this time to just kind of give our hand praise to Dr. Feely and her team for putting this event on, which we know is a much needed event. As I've been sharing with persons, you just never know how life is going to turn for you and who you may have to care for. And that has nothing to do with age. That just has to do with life. So today is going to be very important, and I pray that something is going to be said and done that will encourage you, that will support you, that will give you the things you need so you know how to properly care for your loved ones and to be cared for if that time comes. So again, welcome and thank you all so much. And let's open up with a word of prayer. Father, we thank and we bless you for this day, for this is the day that you made, and we rejoice in it. We thank you for the leadership of our church. We thank you for the leadership of our healthcare ministry. We thank you for her team. Now, Father, we pray that today will be enriching. It'll be a day filled with knowledge, a day of support, a day of encouragement. Let it be a day that we all can take something home and be prepared to apply it in whatever situation we may be in. We thank you now. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Elder Cotton. Again, good morning, everyone. I would like to first say thank you to Ebony for this partnership with Mayo Clinic. And I would like to thank all our panelists for coming out. I'm going to turn it over to the panelists to do their own individual introductions. So first off, I would like to say welcome. And I'm going to start off with Dr. A.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm Paula Adwin, or Dr. A. You can just call me whatever you want. I am a neuropsychologist at Mayo Clinic, and today I'll be talking from two perspectives. I see patients and I evaluate patients who come with concerns because their memory is changing. But I also cared for my grandmother who passed away from dementia. So in your questions and in answering your questions, I'll use both of those lived experiences to tell you what I learned as a family member and also what I've seen in the patients that I've been able to treat. Thank you for having us here today.
Good morning, Maisha Robinson. I'm a neurologist and also a palliative care, supportive care physician. And so similar to Dr. Adwin, I also had a grandmother who had dementia and sort of walked the course of the disease with my family and realized that there was more than just the disease that was affecting her. And so how did it impact the family? How did it impact how people were able to go about their day-to-day activities? How did it impact nutrition and her mood and the family's mood? And so, I've taken that experience as well as many others during my neurology career and really focused on trying to provide support not only to our patients that have memory issues and memory loss and dementia, but also their loved ones and caregivers. So I'm speaking along with Mr. Reddick on the end about the importance of planning ahead, but also thinking about some of the things that may come throughout the course of the disease.
Good morning. I'm Michelle Graf Radford, and I also have had family members who've had dementia, and sadly now have a number of friends suffering from dementia. I have been privileged to be part of the Mayo team. And in fact, Francine, more than a quarter of a century ago, invited me to do stress management for caregivers. And I'll be talking about stress management for caregivers. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Cherie Randolph. I'm a partner here at St. Paul. I was a caregiver for my mom for 13 years who had dementia after my mother passed away in 2016. I then cared for my aunt with heart disease. So I really want to speak today on just being a caregiver in my journey with dementia, as well as just being a caregiver in general, and how important it is for caregivers to also care for themselves as they're caring for their loved ones.
Good morning. I'm Francine Parfit, and I've been involved with Mayo Clinic and the Alzheimer's Center and Memory Disorder Clinic almost since it began. And it's very exciting to me to stay involved, but also the importance of maintaining the best possible quality of life for people dealing with dementia, as well as their family members that are involved with them every minute of every day. So I'm happy to be here with you today and share a little bit of information.
Good morning. My name is Kenneth Reddick. I am what you might call an ambassador. I'm an advocate for the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center at Mayo, and I've served in this role for, I want to say, about 5-7 years now. I've not had anyone in my family to have Alzheimer's or dementia that I'm aware of, but I've had some close friends. And when I think of and see what they went through and what some of their family members went through, it just causes me to want to advocate even more on their behalf in terms of trying to get folk to get help sooner than later and to be diagnosed sooner than later. So we thank you all for coming, and we welcome your questions, and feel free to follow up with us even after this event. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, panelists. So at this time, we're going to open the floor up for questions, and a little Q&A section. I'm going to kick us off. Also, we are... We also are live streaming, so we're going to have Cheryl going to be monitoring the streaming, and we'll ask the questions that are coming in online. Okay, so in here, I'm going to kick us off. Me and Ebony we're going to tag team these questions. So first question is going to be for Dr. A. What are some signs that dementia is getting worse?
Thank you for your question. I first want to answer that question in two parts. So number one, what is dementia? Oftentimes we think that we hear the term Alzheimer's disease and we think that's the same thing as dementia. So dementia is when somebody has a change or a decline in their thinking abilities, right? And that could be memory, but it could also be judgment. It could also be how quickly they think. It could be how well they're able to problem solve. And those changes then become so significant that it becomes to interfere with their daily life. So again, I told you I would bring it back to my own family. My grandmother was a fiercely independent woman her whole life, mother of 12 kids, so busy. And she was in charge of everything in that household. And whenever she started to lose her keys, misplace money, have difficulty figuring things out, to the point where she started to depend a bit more on my aunts and uncles for that support, at that point is when we knew that something was wrong. So in summary, dementia, there's changes in thinking, and it's to the point where somebody has a hard time being independent like they always used to be. So to answer the question is, how do we know it's getting worse? It really becomes in a progression of that. So that person comes to perhaps rely more and more on their family members for not just tasks that are more complicated, let's say like cooking, following multiple steps, these types of things, but even tasks that may be simpler. For example, taking care of themselves, cooking for themselves and taking care of their home. So those are potential signs as well. And sometimes it's not just memory and thinking, it's also mood. Sometimes that can come with becoming more irritable. Sometimes it can becoming more agitated or frustrated in situations where otherwise they would have handled it differently. Thank you.
Next question, Ms. Michelle Graff Radford. What techniques can help to manage caregiving stress?
Thank you for the question. There are many tools that you can use to deal with stress that are very effective and are based on science. The first one is one's breathing. When you are upset or stressed, your breathing is shallow and quick. And just by changing your breathing rate, breathing slower and deeper, can dial down the stress. And there are many different techniques of doing the breathing. I'd like you to just join me in taking a deep breath in, if you would, please. I invite you. And then exhale slowly through your mouth, as if you were blowing on hot soup. Try that again. A deep breath in and a slow breath out. And that's one way of calming your nervous system. Another way is gratitude. Using gratitude to be aware of the blessings in your life. And that can change how you start the day by doing some gratitude practice, and perhaps ending the day with gratitude practice can help you get a better night's sleep instead of counting sheep. The other way that, another tool that you can use is progressive relaxation, tensing and relaxing different muscles in one's body. And particularly with the burden of caregiving, you can be very tense at the end of the day. And by doing this progressive relaxation, it will help you relax and has been shown to help with sleep. Another important aspect is to look at your nutrition. That can affect your mood and your health, and to make sure that you take care of yourself and remain hydrated. And those are just some of the many techniques, and I'll be talking some more about others later. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Also, this question is going to go to Ms. Cherie. What are some of the challenges a caregiver can face?
Thank you so much, Dr. Feely. Some of the challenges that a caregiver can face, number one, is we don't take the time to care for ourselves because we're so in tune to taking care of our loved ones that we don't take the time out to take care of ourselves. And it's easier said than done. I can say that now that I'm no longer in that storm, because when I was caring for my mom, when I was caring for my aunt, my main concern was them. When I started caring for my mom, I also had a small child. He was 4 years old. So the challenge was to make sure that I did what was best for him, because I'm still raising a child, but also do what was best for my mom as well. But in that mix, I wasn't there. I sort of disappeared. I didn't care for myself. I started having health issues. And the doctors and people around me would always tell me, if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be around to take care of your mom or your child. But I didn't see that then. I now see it, because at one point I was taking no medicine. By the end of my caregiving journey, I had a bag full of medication because I didn't eat properly. I didn't go to the doctor like I should. I just did not do what I was supposed to do for myself. Another challenge I had was getting help, being too proud to ask people for help when you know you need the help. you know, and people don't know you need help if you don't reach out and tell them you need help. And I started becoming very resentful because I felt like they should have known, because it was just me and my brother by ourselves. And that was one of my biggest challenges. And I think the greatest challenge for me is that my mom was a medical professional, and they're the worst when it comes to getting diagnosed. Because for many times I would tell her, there's some changes. Nope, there's not. And she would pick a fight with me just to make me go home. And she know I'm not gonna ever disrespect her. So I would, you know, tell her I see things. Okay, maybe you need to go to the doctor. Oh, I've been to the doctor. Well, she worked in nursing for many, many years, so therefore she could just tell me whatever. So I would just, you know, go along with it until I saw things that she could no longer mask anymore. So that was one of my biggest challenges, is getting her to the proper providers to get her diagnosed and get her diagnosed in time. By the time she was diagnosed, we were in the moderate stages of the disease, and it became progressively worse. And for me to lose a piece of her every day, I think it was First Lady Reagan said that it's the long goodbye. And that's definitely what it was, because I actually watched her disappear before my eyes. So those were some of the biggest challenges for me.
Thank you, Cherie.
Okay, Dr. Robinson, what is the most important part of advanced care planning?
So first, I'll just talk about what advanced care planning is. Advanced care planning is really the process of thinking about the type of care that you want whenever you're at the end of life. And everybody's like, I don't want to talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about end-of-life care. And most people do not. But it is important to really think about this, particularly if you have a condition like dementia, what we call a neurodegenerative condition, which is a condition that we anticipate will worsen over time, like you heard Ms. Cherie talking about a second ago. And so it's so important to have these types of conversations early, when the person who has memory loss can still engage in the conversation. So when you say, what's the most important part of it? The most important part is to, number one, engage in the discussion. But there are really two pieces of it. Number one, the question is, who do you want to help you make medical decisions if you cannot make them for yourself? And this should be somebody who, number one, could honor your own wishes and preferences for care at the end of life. And then number two, somebody that you think knows enough about you that can make the right medical decisions. And then number three, somebody who's not going to be too emotionally invested such that they won't be able to handle the decision. So somebody that's going to be crying and on the floor and, you know, needing tissues, that's not going to be the right person for you. So it may not be your spouse, it may not be your child, but it could be. It needs to be somebody that you think could make the decisions you want them to make. So a healthcare surrogate needs to be identified. The second piece is thinking about what kind of care you want at the end of life. All the documents say, if I have an end-stage condition, a terminal condition, or if I'm in a persistent vegetative or comatose state, what kind of medical care do you want if you're in that situation? Do you want to be on breathing machines? Do you want to be on feeding tubes? Do you want to be on things that would artificially keep you going? Nobody wants to make a decision on your behalf, right? Have you all been in these situations ever where you had to make a decision for somebody else? Yes, right. Nobody wants to do that, because what is everybody going to say if they have to make a decision they don't know? What are they going to say? Huh? What'd you say? I don't know. Yeah, or they may just say what? Keep going. Nobody wants to unplug anything, right? Yes. So if you don't sit down and have a conversation, particularly with somebody that has memory loss, then you're losing the opportunity to really understand what the wishes are. But I'll say, if anybody in this room also doesn't have an advance directive, we all need one, because something could happen to any of us. We want to make sure that our wishes are honored whenever we're at that point, and all of us are going to be there at some point.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Mr. Redrick, did you want to add to it?
Only to say that when we get to that point, it's too late to consider putting it in writing or documenting it. So that's why we call it advanced. It's like planning to save. We often hear people talk about a living will. And a living will is one document, and advance directive is another. A living will is a form of advance directive. It's kind of like a power of attorney. There's a power of attorney that gives you limited things that you can do, and then there's a durable power of attorney that encompasses a myriad of things, and often when things happen, and they, as Dr. Robinson said, they will, then it's incumbent upon us to have some comfort in knowing that we've taken care of some things that we needed to take care of, and don't put that burden on our family members to have them try and figure out exactly what we may have desired to happen to us. Thank you.
Thank you. So oftentimes, I oftentimes get questions about how can I become a caregiver? What is the training I need to become a caregiver? So Ms. Francis, is there any training that you need to be a caregiver? And then what are some skills that we need to be or have as a caregiver? And then after that, tell us a little bit, how can we deal with difficult clients or patients as a caregiver? And if I need to repeat, just let me know.
Thank you. I think training is a very broad word. Like Cherie mentioned, and many of us that have been in caregiving roles, it's not always something you've planned for, a phone rings, somebody goes into the hospital. It can happen very suddenly. So I think you can be prepared from a legal standpoint, you can be prepared for a medical decision-making standpoint, but you're not always prepared when it happens. So becoming familiar with the type of dementia you might be dealing with is very, very important, because we often talk about Alzheimer's, but I'm sure Dr. A later will talk about the many, many different types of dementia, and that could impact the way your loved one responds. So learning about the dementia itself is vital. The second part is learning about how you as an individual respond to caring for someone. The person, if they have like an Alzheimer's type of dementia, may appear to be the same physically. They may be physically in great shape for a long time, but as their memory declines, they may be confused. If you're the daughter, they might think you're their sister. If you're a son, they might think you're their husband, because their time judgment changes. Memory goes back, so the recent memory is not good, but the long-term memory may be fine. And if you're caring for someone, like I did with my mom for a while, a daughter, and they start thinking you're your sister, it gets like very confusing, and for sometimes it can be hurtful. So training in the form of understanding what you're dealing with, the main situations that can occur with a person are important to know, so you know best how to deal with them. The person changes, and the way we approach the person also needs to change. The second part of that, I believe, was where you can get training, coming to seminars like this, going to perhaps support groups where you can learn from other people. I think most importantly is developing a very close relationship with the physician that you're using, because you need to be able to express
how the care you're providing is interfering with your own personal health. So I think those are 2 or 3 of the areas that are most important. And also to know how much you can handle. You know, if you think about what you do in a given day for yourself, and now you're adapting your day to support another person, you need to be able to time manage and really do a deep soul search as to how much you can handle. So those are the 2 parts. What was the last part of the question? How to deal with the difficult behaviors. So people, as the memory goes back and they're not as in tune with recent memory, the other thing that can decline, their social graces with a person with probable Alzheimer's seems to stay well. Like they seem to know how to be polite, especially in a public setting. They may treat that primary caregiver not so nicely. It used to be amazing to me where a family would come in and call in advance and say, well, golly, I don't know how Aunt Mary's going to act in the doctor's office because she doesn't talk, she's rude, and that Aunt Mary shows up in the doctor's office and is sweet and kind as can be and answers questions okay. So at home, the person often is not as kind and polite to the primary caregiver. And one of the things a family caregiver needs to understand is that a person may not be being mean or a little bit rude because they want to. It's because they're confused. And their ability to respond to certain requests, especially if it's more than one step, they can't do. So if you're taking care of somebody with dementia and they say, I'm going to go get a glass of water, could I get you anything? And you say, great, I'll have one too. And they come back with an apple, and you can't say, well, you can, but it doesn't get you anywhere to say, I thought you were bringing me water. Oh, no, I got an apple. So one of the first things is to learn not to argue. You have to be able to just say, oh, that apple looks great. I'm going to get a glass of water. Would you like one? So I think the most important thing is to learn not to argue unless a safety measure is in place. Like if you're driving in the car and your loved one with dementia decides they're going to try to open the door, that's a safety issue. And you can raise your voice or put the child locks on or something. But I think the most important thing to learn up front is do not argue. And we'll be talking more about some of these things later in the breakout sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Francine. Now we're going to open up the floor. We're going to switch it up a little bit. We want to hear from you all in the audience. If you have any questions, we're going to surface the room, and feel free to ask the panelists any question, anything that comes to your mind, and they'll be honored to answer them. So anyone have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I have been a caregiver for a while now, and dealing with Alzheimer's and dealing with my husband who doesn't have Alzheimer's but has been paralyzed recently and can't help himself. But I wanted to go back to the power of attorney thing just a little bit. My mother-in-law has Alzheimer's. And yes, I agree with you, doctor. I learned never to argue with her. I figured out I would agree with her and do what I needed to do, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to do what I needed to do, because she was going to argue about it, everything. But going back to the power of attorney, I do have power of attorney, me and my husband, over my mother-in-law. And right now, she's in a nursing home because I had to tell my husband while he's sick and he can't do anything that I couldn't do it all. and that we needed to place her in a facility. So I researched it, never would put her any place without going first to see that place so that I would know that I could feel comfortable with that place, wherever I was putting her. But they recently told me that they are seeing her decline more and more and more. And they asked me about hospice. And they called me because my name is on the papers. So they called me and asked me about hospice, putting her in there, and she's not eating. And the fact that she's not eating, they were thinking about doing a feeding tube. So it's my husband, he has a brother. I talked to my husband and I talked to my brother-in-law, both, and said, you guys, I've got this lady's number. You need to call her back. Make sure that you ask all the questions. Because I didn't feel comfortable making that decision. That's their mother. And so I don't feel comfortable with that. So I don't know if you guys have any suggestions about it, or if I'm going about it the right way, or what is it that I need to do. I personally told them I saw that my husband and my brother-in-law both are hesitant about calling the lady back. So I've got to respond to her. So what I told them is, go ahead and call hospice, and they'll call me, and we'll set up an appointment to talk about it. But it's very, very hard for them at this point. But again, I want them to make a decision. I know I can't make them make it, and I may be forced to make it, but I don't want to make it.
So first of all, thank you for the question. You sound like you're doing an incredible job under very challenging circumstances with both your mother-in-law and your husband. So we completely understand that this can be even more of a challenge trying to figure out what to do with regard to your mother-in-law, who sounds like she may be getting closer to the end of life. So when dementia progresses, as Dr. Adwin was saying, at some point people get to a place where they are unable to do many of the daily activities like bathing and dressing and manage finances and driving and working, etc. They need support for all of that. But then things continue to decline, and people start having difficulty even getting to the bathroom. They may urinate on themselves or have a bowel movement on themselves. They become incontinent. The number of words they speak also tends to go down. When people are needing help with all the daily activities that you can think of, the speech and the language has significantly declined, and they're finding themselves incontinent, maybe not walking at all, and in bed more and more. That's when we tend to think about whether hospice could be appropriate. And just for everybody's information, some of you may know a lot about hospice, but others may not. Hospice is, it's really a philosophy of care, trying to improve quality of life for people who are near the end of life. And so the hospice guidelines suggest that you have a life expectancy of 6 months or less if the disease continues in its normal fashion, that you can be eligible for hospice care. And so a team of doctors, nurses, social workers, spiritual advisors, aides, sometimes volunteers can come and make sure that the person has the best quality of life until the end of life. They don't expedite death, but they also don't prolong life. They make sure that symptoms and needs are managed throughout the end of life. And they also provide great support to family members and loved ones, and even bereavement support about 13 months after the death of a loved one. And so the question is whether or not hospice is appropriate. Many times, in general, we, the medical community, we don't do a good job discussing hospice. And so people are often on hospice for very, very, very short periods of time, where if you ask somebody, you know anybody on hospice? Oh yeah, they went to hospice and died the next day. Hospice didn't make them die the next day. It's probably because we didn't suggest hospice more upstream. And so the benefit of hospice is really early in the course of the disease. You don't want people rushing, trying to figure out what the needs are when somebody has 2 days left to live. And so the earlier, the better. And so I tend to agree with your statement, at least let hospice evaluate her, see what they think, and see if it could be beneficial for her and for the rest of your family. And with regard to the feeding tube, this is often a touchy subject. I mean, we're in Florida. We like to eat, right? And nobody wants to see a loved one not eating. So this becomes a very challenging situation. Most people say, well, if they can't eat, we got to put a tube in. I mean, they got to get nutrition some way. We can't let them what? We can't let them starve to death? Right, exactly. And so we hear this all the time. But one thing I'll say to you all is that the research that has been done does not actually show that putting a feeding tube in somebody at the end of life, so end-stage dementia, it doesn't actually prolong life. It doesn't improve wound healing. It doesn't help them get around better. It actually does things that you probably don't want. It makes people more agitated. They have a new tube in, and they don't know what it is. They're pulling at it. They're picking at it. Sometimes they even pull it out. It can be infected. Some people have to be restrained because they have a feeding tube in, right? It decreases the amount of time that you spend with somebody because you're just hanging a bag and letting it run in versus doing what we suggest, which is comfort feeding, somebody helping to feed during meals and snack times with the known risk that sometimes the food can go down the wrong way, which can happen anytime when people are at the end of life. I hope that's helpful. Anything else you want to add? Anybody else about that?
How y'all doing? I want to find out, how do you go by being a caregiver? My situation is my wife, she's got chronic knee pain. And it's hard working with her. I just want to know how you go about doing it. How about getting it?
So I'll be upfront, I don't know a lot about caregiving for somebody with, knee pain. But in general, there are some great organizations in town. Like, for example, Elder Source. If you can contact them, and there's a sheet in the back, and their number is on it. And they're the local agency in the Northeast Florida, but Jacksonville, that provides different services for the community. And they often do provide some caregiving services. They have at least a newsletter that goes out perhaps once a quarter, but they often do educational programs. So that may be one option. Another option is the City of Jacksonville Senior Services Division. They also do some programming. The other thing that I would consider if it was specifically for knee pain would be to perhaps ask her primary physician if they're aware of any type of training. And the other place that I maybe would call first would be a place like Brooks Rehab, because Brooks in Northeast Florida is, one of the premier places for dealing with physical rehab. And they also may have some caregiver support programs that deal specifically with knee pain.
Thank you.
And just to add to it, for Elder Source, we do have some flyer pamphlets in the back as well that we can put out for you, Deacon Watson.
Thank you. I think it was, yes, he spoke about some further information that you need to have beyond the living will thing. I think he was the one who spoke about that.
So you want to know more further about the
Yeah,
living will?
he sounded like it was the next step, something else.
She would like to know more about the living will process and information on living will. Mr. Redrick.
Okay, the living will process, believe it or not, once you are able to convince your loved one of the need for doing the living will, the process only takes minutes to complete. But I mentioned about the advance directive and the power of attorney versus the durable power of attorney. The living will only goes to a certain point. But when we talk about someone being comatose or having had a stroke, and they now cannot say what their desires are, then that's a problem. Because often the doctor is going to seek the next of kin, and more often the spouse or a child of that individual, to make decisions along with them in terms of what they might advise that might be necessary to prolong the life. But again, it's just important to gather and to know what that person's desires are well in advance of something happening. So my thoughts are to everyone here, even if you have a child that's 18 years or older, you need them to do a living will and or an advance directive. Because once they become 18, then even as a parent, you will probably not gain access to information concerning them, even though you are the parent, without them having given prior consent. And that's why now when you go in doctor's offices, they'll ask you a first, second, and even a third person that you might wish to share information with. I'll give you a prime example. I had a son who had an incident in Tallahassee as a student at FAM. And I hurried over to Tallahassee only to find out when I went to the emergency room, the doctor said to me, "I'm sorry, Mr. Reddick, but I can't share any of that information with you." That was devastating to me because I was not aware of the laws. So what I want to say to you all is, it's just like if you ask many morticians, how many individuals come to plan services that have adequate funds to pay for those funeral services? The numbers are alarming in terms of the people who don't, because again, there is no advanced planning. And we just need to do a better job of addressing some things before we leave it on someone else to make that decision for us. The power of attorney, if you don't have a durable power of attorney, you can't just go to the bank with a regular power of attorney and expect to be able to go in that person's account and take money out. It has to be spelled out that you have access to this, you have access to that. You could have been married 60, 70 years and you still won't be able to touch a dime. So what we're doing here now is trying to educate you, not just for the advanced care and the living will, but just in terms of pre-planning. Pre-planning. I have a young fellow who had a stroke just a few years out of dental school. A massive stroke. Was getting ready to build his practice. But because of that stroke, it was cut short. So the same way we talk about the living will and advanced care, and I talked about funerals and so forth, we need to also be mindful of the fact that sometimes our loved ones really don't care about who they leave that burden on. So if you don't talk to them now, then you're maybe starting a GoFundMe to try to help yourself to provide a decent burial for them. I don't mean to deviate that much, but I do believe in taking advantage of the time when someone puts a mic in my hand to share some of those things with you because they're important. Long-term care. Sometimes we don't want to put people in a facility because of the costs associated with them going to a nursing home for long term. You're talking about $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 a month to put them in a facility. If you're on Medicaid, you stand a better chance of going in a facility and staying there long term than you do if you're middle income. You need to know that because it will cripple you if you're not planning. I'm going to turn it off right there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reggie. Oh, no, go ahead.
Many life insurance policies have what they call an accelerated death benefit rider. A lot of us may not be aware of that, but accelerated death benefit riders, kind of like what Dr. Robinson alluded to earlier, is if the doctor determines that maybe you have 6 months or less to live, then you can go to that life insurance policy and take a certain amount of that out of that life insurance policy to help offset some of those costs that if you had to put them in a facility. So, number one, hopefully everyone has a life insurance policy. But if they do, double check and see if they have an accelerated death benefit rider on that policy. So if you come to that point, that you may have an opportunity to get some money from that policy.
I have a question from the live feed from Janine Cornish. She wants to know which option is best in VA for palliative or hospice care for assistance with ADLs. The person is a vet and she wants to know if Elder Source is available in Virginia.
So every state and every county in the U.S. has a quote-unquote elder source. Comes under the Department of Health and Human Services, the Division of Aging, and it's like nationwide. It may not be called elder source. There's a phone number on the resource list, but it basically is 1-800-ELDER. And it will take you to the elder locator. Rebecca, I may have it, I can read it to you. But the elder care locator, you call the number and you basically just have to provide your zip code or the county you live in, anywhere in the United States, and it will connect you with the quote-unquote elder source. It used to be called the Area Agency on Aging in your community. So you just have to look up Elder Care Locator and dial that 800 number, and she'll be able to find the appropriate resource in Virginia.
Thank you.
Regard to whether palliative care or hospice care can help with the activities of daily living, the ADLs, bathing, dressing, toileting, things like that. There are often aides with the hospice agency or volunteers that can help with those sorts of things, but they're not there all the time. So they come a couple times a week depending on what the needs are. So sometimes people need additional assistance too with the bathing, dressing, and things of that nature.
So if she would like, the number for the elder care locator is 800-677-1116. And when you get there, it should say elderlocator.gov, not something like a place for mom, then it's an advertisement.
Okay. We have another question.
We know that we have all of these places for help, such as Elder Source, but don't want people to think that they're going to get help right away. I was on Elder Source list for about 2 years with my mother-in-law, waiting for her to come up on the list. So I guess one question is there a way that there could be some training on how to complete all the paperwork for Elder Source? It's all in how you answer the question. You know, the question may be, can she bathe herself? Yeah, if I sat her in the tub and I soaked up a washcloth and gave it to her, she could do that. But really, she can't. You know, I'm still right there doing that. But when they look at me saying, honestly, you know, yeah, she could bathe herself. I didn't know that. But if I had answered no on that question, then it would have got a little more attention. So Elder Source takes a long time to help you, but when you get it, it's good when you get it. You know, yeah, it's that long, about 2 years before I could get some help.
So,
Yeah, they're saying because of the funding, but I know, and it's hard for middle income people or lower income people to get some of these privileges and some of these things. You know, we just have to go through the fire.
So I would agree with you on both major statements. The funding is limited. In the state of Florida, there are more and more people needing services. And the best way is to be the squeaky wheel and constantly call and ask for an update. You also can sometimes call the Department of Elder Affairs and plead your case with them as well. Because there's limited funds, there's many programs, but they all are funded from the same bucket. So you have to be persistent. The second part of the question is those forms are incredibly difficult to complete. And there were many years where I was one of the people in Tallahassee petitioning to make those forms a bit more clear, and you basically hit the nail on the head in your explanation. You don't know how to answer some of the questions because everybody tries to be honest, and I'm not telling anybody not to be honest, but sometimes you have to take a deep breath and think for a moment just what you described. If I give my loved one a washcloth and I put a little soap on it and water and I stand there, yes, they know what to do. But is that actually being able to bathe independently? I am not aware of anybody that trains people in how to best fill those forms out, unless perhaps you had a personal advocate that would help. I'm not quite sure if they used to come into the home to fill those forms out with a caregiver, and then they would also be assessing the ability of that caregiver to provide the service. So the best way I can tell you is just to fill those forms out as honest as you can, based on the way you just described it, and then become a squeaky wheel and constantly calling. And I don't mean once a month.
Okay, next question.
I have a question for kind of like piggyback on what my sister over there was saying. Is what kind of services, I'm a caregiver, I was a caregiver for my mom. I had to put her in hospice. I'm not a fan of hospice because the way you explained hospice was beautiful. The way I experienced hospice was not great. It was not great at all. So that's something that I'm dealing with because now I'm taking care of my dad. But what kind of programs do you have for individuals who I guess we call middle class? They're not on the Medicaid, but their income will not suffice or take care of a nurse coming in and that charge you $37 an hour or $27 an hour. I have experienced that. I did go through Elder Source. He doesn't meet that criteria, but he's right there. You make just a little bit too much, but not enough to take care of him. So it's left up to me to take care of him. And I don't have any resources that can help me financially.
So through Mayo Clinic, the primary resources we have are based on more like education. You know, we do seminars, support groups. Christine, who's handing you the microphone, does some caregiver programs that we'll be providing some information on. As far as like in-home care or financial support for programming, we don't have that through our programs at Mayo Clinic. I would suggest directly reaching out to probably the Department of Elder Affairs and speaking with them. There are waiver programs for exactly what you described. Unfortunately, there's probably wait lists for that, but there are waiver programs for, you know, someone that's falling within a few dollars of the cutoff. It's very similar to like when you talk about community-based Medicaid as opposed to facility-based Medicaid. There's a little bit of stretch there. And if Elder Source can't help you, then I would probably speak with Aging True or directly go to the Department of Elder Affairs.
Just add one other thing. You probably explored many of these options, but sometimes people will say, you know, my family has said anything I can do to help, or somebody at my church has said, how can I help? And many times people haven't actually said, well, the way you could help is if you could come to my house between, you know, 1 and 4 on Tuesdays so I can go do X, Y, Z. Or the way you could help would be, can you grocery shop for me this week? Can you cut the yard? Can you do things? And sometimes just taking some of the other things, all the rest of the stuff you have to do, a little bit off your plate can be helpful. So if you have any people in your life, family, friends, church family, or sometimes even church groups have health ministries where people are looking to volunteer, then I would tap into those resources too.
I can add one more thing. There's also a private organization in Jacksonville called Heartfelt Ministries, and they are fantastic. And are you aware of them?
I have a question. I'm a caregiver for my husband, and he has dementia. And I want to know, do dementia have stages? And how can you tell where your loved one fall in that stage, or what stage that they're at?
Thank you for your question. I apologize. I was getting the water halfway through that, but I just want to make sure I capture all parts of your question, is that you're currently going through that with a loved one, and you're curious about what are the different signs to know when it's mild versus moderate versus severe. Is that correct? Okay. So, you know, usually I would say that in the initial or mild stages of dementia, going back to that definition, right, of changes in memory and thinking, those changes in memory and thinking may be less consistent. Maybe the forgetfulness isn't about everything, it's about certain things. But still, your loved one would be able to do some activities on their own, right? So not necessarily more complicated tasks or things like this. And maybe you're kind of keeping an eye and maybe monitoring more, but still independent in most cases. When you're going more into the moderate stages, you would really see greater changes in thinking, and oftentimes that can be harder time remembering details of conversations, details of things that happened, to the point where you might become worried that, you know, maybe even about more confusion going out in public and maybe forgetting where they are, forgetting how to get home, forgetting the purposes of, you know, why they ended up where they are. At that point too, maybe it wouldn't become so much monitoring, supporting around things like important safety things like keeping track of medications and driving, but you would become a little bit more involved. When you get more into the severe stages, like Dr. Robinson mentioned, you would expect that some of those difficulties would kind of get in the way of even personal care. You know, in many ways, maybe personal hygiene would start to change, or maybe things that were really important to him before, just as an example, maybe getting ready to go out and getting ready to go to church, getting ready to see friends is something that just doesn't have that interest as much anymore, more withdrawal. And then you would also see those changes, like Dr. Robinson mentioned, of maybe talking a little bit less, interacting and engaging much less, and then what that would mean for family or anyone who is involved in his care and seeing him is that there would be more support around more things, to the point where it wouldn't maybe be monitoring support around medications and things that would keep him safe, but around everything else, just to make sure that he's well supported and that those memory changes or thinking changes don't put him in a dangerous situation. Thank you.
Okay, still more questions to come.
I don't really have a question, but being in the healthcare field for like 48 years, I haven't heard this mentioned this morning. The thing is with when we have loved ones that have health issues, either way, whether it's dementia or just general health issues, the first thing that we need to do when they have issues and you're going to seek and you're seeking help, you have to start with your primary care doctor. And you let them know all the things that you're going through and what you need. And they can write an order for home health, which you won't, like someone mentioned, you won't have them every day. You might have 3 times a week. They also have services that come in and help with light housekeeping. And they also have people that come in and help you, give you 4 hours or whatever a day. But the problem with some people, they don't know. So start with them, tell them what you need, and be persistent about what you need, and then accept whatever help that you can get, because it will help you. Those 3 hours, those 2 hours that every other day, 3 times a week, it makes a difference if you don't have a great support system. Thank God I did when my husband was sick. He had a whole entourage, thank God. But they have so many resources, and it's not a lot. You don't feel like, well, I can't get a whole day, I can't get 8 hours, but get what you can get. It makes a difference. And make sure I am taking care of my health this year from things I need to do last year, because I had to put them off because he was ill. But we do have to remember to take care of ourselves first.
Thank you.
And I would like to also add to that, a lot of things we don't know. Look into your jobs. My job actually allowed me respite care. And there were services that were available through my job that allowed me to have someone to actually come in and do home health care for my loved one. I think it's the there you go. EAP is what it was called, and they actually had services that came in. They gave me so many hours per year that I could utilize for my loved one. If I needed to go to work and say that she was sick, they would send someone. All I had to do was call. And they had an agency that they had already partnered with to come in and have someone sit with her during the day if I had to go into the office, or if I just needed respite care. They had an agency that they had already set up. So those are some things that we don't look into, that our jobs and our policies and different amenities that are available at our jobs that we don't even look into. And as Ms. Adrian stated, you have to have a circle of partners. I mean, I was very lucky to have a circle of partners. I started with my primary care doctor. From there, we just had a different circle of providers. And don't be afraid to reach out to your loved ones and say, hey, I need help. I didn't do that. When they said, what can I do to help? I was like, you just saying that. You're not really, don't really want to come in to help me. So one time I just called one of my cousins. I called him his bluff on it. And sure enough, he came from Savannah to help me, and I just took the whole day. Now, by the end of that 8 hours, he was like, okay, I see what you're talking about, what you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. But we have to, like I said earlier, put our pride aside. Sometimes you just have to ask for the help, but you have to be your biggest advocate, or the biggest advocate for your loved one.
Hi, good morning. I had a follow-up question to the comment about the finances, and I think you made a comment, sir, about not being able to qualify for Medicaid. I had a coworker, this is many years ago, but he talked about transferring assets out of his father's name so he could qualify. Could someone speak to that? So, quote unquote, you look poor on paper, so you do qualify for the services. So can someone speak to how you can plan ahead and know to do those things so you can qualify for services?
Yes, ma'am. You, I wasn't going to bring that up because some people might have thought it would be dishonorable to do that. However, I spoke to a family law attorney, and just what you said, that's one of the things that he advised me to do, is to early on transfer things out of her name. To also, in order for the person to qualify, they cannot have more than $2,000 in the bank. You have to look at other assets. They look at a total of I think the cap is $2,000. It may have changed since I was caregiving, but it was $2,000. I believe it is still the same. And yes, I didn't bring it up because I thought people would think that would be dishonorable, but it's unfortunate that that's what you have to do in order to qualify for some things. But sometimes you got to have, you know, kind of be a step ahead. And I was just, you know, happy that he told me to do those things. And once I did those things, then I was able to get some services. However, when you do the transferring, there is a time frame in which they go back to see how far back that this person has not had these assets. And I want to say it's like 9 months to a year, possibly.
Can you provide like who to go to for that to happen? Because how I need the how. Because transfer, does that mean open a new bank account? Like can you?
I did it myself because he actually sat me down and gave me a pencil and paper and told me to write everything. So I actually went to the bank and I had a durable power of attorney, as Mr. Reddick spoke of. I had that, so I was able to actually go to the bank because I was already on the account. I had the power of attorney, and I was able to transfer all of the funds out of one account into another account. Although it was still her money, it was in my name. And I only left a certain amount in her account, but I consistently, as her pension or her monies came in, was able to transfer because they could see I was also utilizing it for her care. So as the money was coming in, the money was also going out.
In that same vein, what you can also do, because usually the home is one of the largest assets that's taken into consideration, and you could do what's called a life estate deed, and that life estate deed simply says that as long as the owner, the owner is living, that the house is there for them to live in, but immediately upon death, the house goes to the person named on that life estate deed. So technically, the person listed on there as on the life estate deed now becomes the owner of the property, but the person living in the property, it could be your mom or dad or whomever, they are still able to qualify for assistance, get a homeowner policy, do pretty much anything, get help fixing up the house, even while the property is going to be transferred over to someone else. That takes you out of that income category, asset category, and better position you. But again, there's a threshold of time that you have to be concerned with when you do that. And I want to back up a minute. Anyone that has a veteran, knows of a veteran who's going through a lot of medical issues, be mindful of the fact that there are funds available to even pay a spouse up to $30-some thousand to care for your loved one. If that veteran has a certain percent disability, so make sure you check into that too, because $30-some thousand a year can come in very handy, and it doesn't mean that they got to be bedridden or anything like that, but I think they do have to have a certain percent disability in order to qualify for that. So make sure that as we talk about these circles of resources, if you're a veteran or you know a family member that's a veteran, that you look into the VA. They have programs designed to help veterans as well, and that could be a big plus.
Thank you. And at this time, we're going to take that one last question before we do our breakout sessions. And I believe Ms. Cookie, you had that.
Yes, I just kind of wanted to talk about the power of attorney, what the gentleman was talking about. I do have my mother, I have the living will, and I also have the power of attorney, but I had to go to the bank. You know, she's 94, thank God, she's doing well. Doesn't have dementia. I mean, she does, you know, can't remember some things, but she's doing well. And my father was a veteran, so she has TRICARE, and her practitioner comes to her. She never has to go out to the doctor. So I'm blessed in that way. But I had to take her to the bank with me when she was like 91, 92, and she had to actually, even though I was the power of attorney, I had to have her sign a release form at the bank, releasing all her assets as far as her banking money and what have you, that I would be able to get it if anything ever happened to her. Otherwise, I would have had to go through a whole lot of other stuff, but she's doing well. But if anything happened to her, I would not have been able to have access to her funds. And we both bank at the same bank. But I had to actually literally get her to go into the bank with me and sit at the table, the desk or whatever, and they had to have her sign a form saying, this is my daughter. If anything happens to me, the funds are to be put in her name and in her hands. So I don't know if that'll help anybody, but you know, while they're still able to go to the bank and do that, you know, instead of waiting until they're not able to do it. So now, you know, that might help someone to know that.
Ms. Cookie, you were right on point, and let me just add to that. If your loved one is unwilling, feels uncomfortable adding you to their account, at least you should do what they call a POD, a payable on death. And that does exactly what Ms. Cookie just alluded to. That means that when that person dies, then whatever's in that account goes directly to that person. It's like a beneficiary. So that way that avoids something. But it's real tricky when you got a joint account, when two people are on an account and one person is not fulfilling their financial responsibility or obligation to that institution, they'll pull money from that joint account to satisfy the balance, the difference that you owe in the other account. So whatever you do, whoever you put as a surrogate, POA, you want to make sure that that person is trustworthy and are going to do exactly what you hope that they will do. In event something happens to you, even while you yet live, because they do have excess and they can wipe you out. And I've known situations where that has happened. Affords you the opportunity to do any and everything in that account that someone else would do.
Thank you, Mayo Clinic. I want to take this time. We are getting ready to break out into breakout sessions. But before we break out, I just want to say thank you for the panelists for coming out. And thank you, St. Paul, for partnering with us and taking the time out to come out on the Saturday to partner with us as Mayo gives us some great information and resources. We just don't want to stop here. Come in January, for our caregivers, we want to do something called Catch Your Breath. It is a time for you all. We always taking care of everyone else, but who is taking care of us? And that day will be a day for you. So I'm going to have Miss Christine come up as she talk about January's event.
Thank you. Okay, hi everyone. So we've heard a lot today about self-care, and that's what the program that I'm going to talk to you about really drives home, is remembering, like some of our panelists said, to stop and take care of yourself. It's really important. So this program, I'll give you a little overview. It's called Catch Your Breath. It's a respite program for caregivers, and the program was designed to take into account the self-care opportunities for someone who is caring for a loved one with dementia. We realize that, that is 24/7. There's not a clock out time. There's not a break. There's really not a significance to the weekend or any of those things. So you really do need to take some time somehow for yourself. And the workshops that we're presenting are on topics of wellness, communication, and brain health. Those are some of the things that we find to be helpful. The wellness really focuses on that self-care piece with things like learning some yoga techniques, some mindfulness, some breath work. There's a program called Laughter Yoga. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. I had not until we got involved in it. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a lot of humor, and sometimes we forget to laugh and take things lightheartedly, so it's a great program to bring that back. There's also the innovative ways to communicate, and then the lifestyle choices that can help to either prevent dementia or possibly slow progression of cognitive decline. So those are the topics that we try to cover. And what we're excited to bring to you is actually a pilot of what we're going to call our community caregiver version of all of these programs. So we want to bring like a sampling, a taste of all of those things, a little bit of the wellness part, a little bit of the communication part, a little bit of the brain health part, and put it all together for a community program for you, and that's going to be held here at St. Paul on January 11. So we want you to save the date for that, and I would love to take some contact information during the course of the day today. There's sign-up sheets and papers that you can leave your email, phone number. We want to be able to reach out to you with proper registration opportunities, so it'll have all the details. We do have flyers here today that you can take with you. They'll be in the breakout room, so you can see those. Just make sure you grab one today. Has a little bit of details, and it's got some contact information, so you can reach out to us as well. So we really look forward to January 11. If you know other caregivers in this community that you think could benefit the more the merrier. We'll probably end up capping due to space. So I'll say that space is maybe somewhat limited. So be sure to just inquire if you have questions, and we will definitely reach out to you to make sure you all have opportunity to get registered. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. So at this time, I want to say thank you again for everyone coming out. We are getting ready to do breakout sessions. For Dr. A will be right here in the sanctuary, right there in the to my left, maybe your right, depending on where you're sitting. She'll be right there. And then we will have Mr. Redrick and Dr. Robinson will also be in the sanctuary. They'll be up here to my right. I will have Miss Cherie going to be in the dining hall and talking about caregiver experience. Miss Francine will be in the education hall. Oh, we swapped, sorry. Michelle going to be in the education hall. That's why I turned on to make sure. And then Miss Francine in the conference room. I will have healthcare members, if you could please stand and escort guests of honor to their designated areas. And again, St. Paul, thank you again for coming out this evening. Please, please go to the breakout sessions. They'll get more on your one-on-one. Also, Ebony and Mr. Victor, thank you again for today.
We're glad to be here. Right here, up here in the front.